My future sister-in-law planned her bachelorette party at a water park, certain I would back out because she called me too big for a swimsuit, but my husband had already recorded every word she said. The kitchen window was cracked 4 inches. I heard Vanessa's laugh before I heard her words, and even her laugh sounded like a decision she'd already made. I have to invite her, obviously. My brother's paying for everything, she said. Her friend Renee laughed, easy and comfortable, the kind of laugh that comes from practice. They'd done this before, talked about me like I was a line item. So, what are you going to do? Renee asked. You can't just not invite her. I already did it, Vanessa said. I picked a water park. A pause. I stood on the sidewalk holding a card with a cartoon engagement ring on the front, and I felt my whole body go still, the way it does right before you understand something you can't take back. She's way too big for a swimsuit, Vanessa said. She'll back out on her own. Problem solved. More laughter. Easy. Comfortable. The laughter of 2 women who had never once considered that a wall might have ears, or that a sidewalk might have witnesses, or that cruelty said out loud has a way of outliving the moment it's spoken in. I looked at my husband, Ethan. He wasn't looking at me. He had already pulled his phone from his pocket, already turned the screen dark side up, already pressed record. He didn't say a word. He just stood there in front of his sister's cracked kitchen window and let it run for 11 seconds, then 20, then 30, capturing every word like he already knew, somehow, that he'd need it later. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything, Vanessa said. I just stood on that sidewalk, 6 weeks out from losing our daughter, and felt something in my chest go quiet and cold and very, very still. Ethan slid his phone back into his pocket. He took the card out of my hand, walked it to the mail slot himself, and dropped it through without ringing the bell. Then he took my hand and walked me back to the car like we were leaving a funeral, which, in a way, we were. I kept waiting for him to say something on the short walk to the car. Some version of, I can't believe she said that, or, are you okay? The things you'd expect a person to say in that moment. He didn't say any of it. He opened my door first, the way he'd done on our first date 4 years earlier, and only after I was buckled in did he finally speak, and even then it was quiet, almost to himself. Okay, he said, more to the windshield than to me. Okay. I didn't understand yet that this was the sound of a decision being made. Neither of us spoke on the drive home. I watched Westerville go by in pieces, the gas station on Schrock Road, the dry cleaner with the faded awning, the elementary school where I used to imagine, months earlier, that our daughter would one day go to kindergarten. Ethan's jaw was tight the whole way. His knuckles were pale on the wheel. I want to go home, I finally said, though we were already 3 minutes from it. He nodded like that made sense, and it did, because home was the only place in the world that hadn't yet betrayed me that week. He made tea when we got inside, the way his mother had taught him. Too much sugar and too little patience for steeping, and I let it sit untouched while he disappeared into the office down the hall. I heard the low murmur of his voice through the door, but couldn't make out the words. He was on the phone for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave the whole time, watched the green numbers change, and thought about the words, too big for a swimsuit, turning over and over like a stone in a rock tumbler, getting smoother and uglier at the same time. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the first thread of something Ethan had been quietly pulling for months. I wouldn't understand the shape of it for another 2 weeks. All I knew, standing in my kitchen with cold tea in my hands, was that my husband had just watched his sister plan my humiliation like a party favor, and he hadn't said a single word to stop it. He'd just pressed record. At the time, I thought that was restraint. Later, I understood it was strategy. To understand how we got to that kitchen window, you have to go back further than 6 weeks. You have to go back almost 3 years, to the wedding where I first became a Hale. My name is Claire. I was 32 years old that August, a senior account manager at a marketing firm in downtown Columbus, the kind of job where I spent my days managing other people's crises and my evenings. That particular summer, learning I had almost none of the same steadiness left over for my own. I'd grown up an only child in Marion, Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital lab, and I think that upbringing made me both more independent than most people my age and more susceptible than I wanted to admit to the specific pull of a big, loud, built-in family like the Hales, even the parts of it that weren't good for me. I was 29 when I married Ethan, in a backyard ceremony in Powell, Ohio, under a maple tree his grandfather had planted in 1961. I wore my mother's dress, altered twice because I'd lost weight from wedding stress, and then gained it back from wedding cake, and I remember standing at that altar thinking I had married into a family, not just a man. That turned out to be half true. Ethan was 31 then, already 6 years into a career at Heartland Community Bank, working his way up through loan operations with the kind of patient, methodical competence that made him excellent at his job and occasionally maddening at home, because he processed everything the way he processed a loan file, slowly, thoroughly, and only after he had every document in hand. Vanessa was 26 at our wedding. She gave a toast that was, in retrospect, the first data point in a pattern I wouldn't recognize as a pattern for years. She stood up with a glass of champagne, looked right at me and said, "I've never seen my brother this happy, so I guess I'll allow it." The room laughed. I laughed too, because it was a joke, because it was supposed to be a joke, because you don't want to be the woman who can't take a joke at her own wedding. Vanessa was the younger sibling by 4 years, and from what Ethan told me early on, that 4-year gap had shaped both of them in ways their parents never fully saw. Robert and Diane Hale were kind people, generous people, but they were also people who mistook a squeaky wheel for a hungry one. Ethan had been quiet as a kid, responsible responsible, the one who did his homework and mowed the lawn without being asked. Vanessa had been the one who cried the loudest, wanted the most, and got it, because giving in to Vanessa was easier than holding a line with her. By the time I met the family, that pattern was cemented into something nobody questioned anymore. Ethan paid for things. Vanessa received them. It wasn't malicious, not at first. It was just how the Hales operated, a family economy nobody had ever renegotiated. I noticed the pattern early, but I didn't understand its cost until later. There was a dinner in March of our first year of marriage, Ethan's 32nd birthday, at a steakhouse off Route 23. I remember the date because it was March 14th, and Vanessa made a joke about it being Pie Day, and then, 20 minutes later, made a different kind of joke entirely. I'd ordered the ribeye. Vanessa watched the server set it down in front of me, watched me pick up my fork, and said, loud enough for the table, "Wow, big portions tonight, huh? Good for you, honestly." I could never eat like that in front of people. Diane laughed a little, the nervous kind of laugh parents give when they don't want to referee. Robert didn't seem to hear it at all. Ethan's hand found my knee under the table, a small, silent squeeze, but he didn't say anything out loud. I put my fork down for a second, picked it back up, and finished my steak because I refused to let her decide what I ate. I brought it up to Ethan in the car afterward. He sighed and said, "That's just Vanessa. She says things. She doesn't mean anything by it." I remember thinking, even then, that "she doesn't mean anything by it" was doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, propping up years of comments nobody wanted to name. There was another incident, smaller but somehow more telling, at Easter the following year. Diane had set up a photo backdrop in the backyard, string lights and a floral arch, the whole family posing in 2s and 3s. In one photo, the one that ended up on Diane's mantle for the next 18 months, I'd been standing at the edge of the frame next to Ethan. When Vanessa posted the edited version to her Instagram a week later, I'd been cropped out entirely. Just Ethan, alone, smiling in front of the arch, like the marriage itself had been quietly redacted. I never said anything about it. I told myself I was being sensitive, that it was probably just a bad crop, that I was looking for evidence of something that might not exist. That's the trick of a slow pattern. Each individual moment is small enough to talk yourself out of. It's only when you stack them end to end, months later, that you can see the shape of the wall being built. There was one more incident worth mentioning, because it mattered later in ways I couldn't have predicted. 2 years into our marriage, Vanessa's car broke down, a transmission issue that priced out at $2,800 at a shop in Dublin. She asked Ethan for the money over a Sunday phone call, crying about how she couldn't afford it and couldn't get to work without a car, and he wired it to her that same afternoon, the way he always did. She told him at the time that she'd pay him back within 3 months, once her next bonus came through at the marketing agency where she worked as an account coordinator. 3 months passed, then 6. Ethan never brought it up again, and I only knew about it because I saw the transfer in our joint banking app and asked him about it once, casually, over dinner. "She'll pay it back when she can," he'd said, in the same tone he used for most things involving his sister, a tone that had long since stopped expecting follow-through and had simply adjusted its baseline instead. She never did pay it back. I filed that away too, another small brick in a wall I wouldn't fully see until it was already built around us. 14 months before that kitchen window, Vanessa got engaged to a man named Marcus Doyle, a soft-spoken structural engineer she'd met at a friend's barbecue in Dublin, Ohio. He was kind in a way that seemed almost too gentle for the family he was marrying into, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and asked follow-up questions like he actually wanted the answers. I liked him immediately. I think, in a different family, he and Vanessa might have built something real and steady. But the wedding planning started, and with it, the family economy kicked into gear exactly the way it always had. Ethan offered to help with costs, the way he'd helped with things his whole life. A few thousand for the venue deposit, he said at first. Then a few thousand more for catering. By the time the invoices stopped arriving, 14 months in, Ethan had quietly paid $38,400 toward his sister's wedding. The venue deposit alone was $12,000. Catering ran $9,800. The photographer, a woman Vanessa insisted was the only one who really understood her aesthetic, cost $4,200. Vanessa's dress from a boutique in German Village was $3,100. Flowers, rentals, a chocolate fountain nobody asked for. The rest filled in the gap. I didn't resent the money. Not exactly. It was Ethan's to give, and he gave it freely, the way he'd always given to Vanessa. What I resented, slowly and then all at once, was watching that generosity get treated as a baseline instead of a gift. Every time he wrote a check, Vanessa's gratitude got a little thinner, a little more assumed. "Thanks, obviously," she'd say. The word obviously doing the same quiet work that "she doesn't mean anything by it" had done for years. And through all 14 months of that, the small comments kept coming. A remark about my portion sizes at a family dinner in Grandview. A text in the group chat about bridesmaid dresses that read, in part, "Obviously we'll need to look at plus options for some people," sent directly after I'd been added to the thread, with no name attached, no acknowledgement that I might read it. A photo where I'd been cropped again, this time from a group shot at a bridal shower I hadn't even been able to attend, because I was recovering from a D&C I hadn't told anyone about yet. That was the piece nobody in the family knew. In early June, 11 weeks into a pregnancy, Ethan and I had been carefully, quietly hopeful about. I lost our daughter. We hadn't told anyone yet, not even Diane, because we'd wanted to wait until the second trimester, until it felt safe to say out loud. So when it ended in private, in an exam room in Dublin, Ohio, with a doctor saying words I still can't fully repeat. And then it kept ending, quietly, for weeks afterward, in a house where nobody outside of it knew there was anything to grieve. I went back to work at my marketing firm 9 days later because I didn't know what else to do with a Tuesday. Ethan went back to the bank. We told people we were just tired. We were, in fact, being hollowed out in real time by something we couldn't say out loud. And into that hollowed out space, 2 months later, came a pink invitation with cartoon palm trees on the front, inviting me to a party where my body would be the punchline. I didn't know, standing in my kitchen with the invitation in my hand, that Ethan had already started noticing something else about his sister, something that had nothing to do with swimsuits and everything to do with numbers on a screen at Heartland Community Bank. I wouldn't learn about that part until much later. All I knew that afternoon was that Vanessa Hale had built her entire bachelorette party around a bet that I would be too ashamed to show up. She was about to learn how wrong that bet was. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, hot pink cardstock with cartoon palm trees and a banner that read, "Vanessa's Last Splash," in looping gold script. I stood at the kitchen counter and read it twice, then a third time, looking for a version of the words that didn't mean what I already knew they meant. I called Harper that night. She'd been my best friend since college, a labor and delivery nurse who had sat with me in the exam room in June and never once made me explain myself twice. She wants me to not come, I told her. That's the whole plan. A water park, a swimsuit. She's betting on my shame doing her dirty work for her. Do you want to go? Harper asked, and I could hear her setting something down on the other end of the line, giving me her full attention. I don't want to let her win by hiding, I said, but I also don't know if I can survive standing in a swimsuit in front of a woman who's already decided what my body means. Then go, Harper said. You don't have to be okay. You just have to show up. Okay and showing up are two different things, and you've been doing the second one for 6 weeks already. That conversation settled something in me. I decided I would go. I told Ethan that night, and he nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting to hear it, and said, okay, then let's make sure you're not walking in there alone. I didn't fully understand what he meant by that yet. I would, in time. The 2 weeks between the invitation and the party were their own kind of escalation. 4 or 5 moves in a game I hadn't agreed to play, each one landing harder than the last, each one somehow presented as reasonable, as caring, as just the way things were. The first move came through Diane. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice pitched into the specific register mothers-in-law use when they've been sent to do a job they don't fully want to do. Vanessa just wants everyone to feel included, she said. She picked the water park because it's fun, not because of anything about you specifically. I think you're reading into it. I hadn't told Diane what we'd overheard through the kitchen window. Ethan had asked me not to, not yet, and I'd agreed, though I didn't fully understand why at the time. So I sat on the phone and let Diane tell me I was reading into something I had heard with my own ears. And I said, as calmly as I could manage, I appreciate you calling, Diane. I'm still planning to be there. Good, she said, relieved, like she'd successfully talked a difficult employee off a ledge. It'll be fun, you'll see. The second move came directly from Vanessa 3 days later, in a text that read like an apology and functioned like a trap. Hey, I know things have been weird lately. I really hope you can come. It wouldn't feel right without you there. You're my sister too. 3 exclamation points. No mention of the water park. No mention of swimsuits. Just enough warmth to make me feel unreasonable for still being wary, which was, I would come to understand, exactly the point. I showed the text to Ethan. He read it twice, his expression unreadable, and said, that's not an apology. That's insurance. Insurance for what? For later. So if you back out now, or if this ever comes up, she can point to this text and say she tried. I didn't fully understand what he meant by if this ever comes up. I filed it away. The third move was the registry. Vanessa had set up a bachelorette wish list on a party site, mostly silly things, matching cover-ups, the inflatable flamingo float, sunscreen in a personalized bottle. But at the top of the list, flagged as for the whole crew, was a set of matching swimsuits in a single style, a high-cut one-piece that ran, according to the size chart linked on the page, only up to a size 12. I am a size 18. I looked at that registry for a long time, at the deliberate surgical specificity of a size chart that stopped exactly where I started. I didn't say anything to Vanessa about it. I ordered my own swimsuit instead, a navy one-piece with real support and real coverage, the kind of suit that fit the body I actually had instead of the body someone else had decided I should perform. When it arrived, I hung it in the closet and didn't look at it again until the morning of the party. I met Harper for lunch the following week at a diner on High Street we'd been going to since college, and I told her about the registry, about the size chart that stopped exactly where I started. She set down her coffee and was quiet for a second longer than usual. You know this isn't really about a swimsuit, she said. I know, I mean it. If it wasn't the water park, it would have been something else. The seating chart, the dress code, the photographer angles. Some people just need a smaller room to feel like the biggest thing in it, and they'll build that room out of whatever's closest. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You don't owe her a smaller version of yourself just because she's more comfortable that way. I held on to that the rest of the week, the way you hold on to a single useful sentence in the middle of a lot of noise. The fourth move came at a family dinner in early August, at Diane and Robert's house in Powell, 12 days before the party. Vanessa brought it up herself, unprompted, in front of everyone, in a voice pitched for an audience. I just think it's so important that everyone feels comfortable, she said, looking somewhere over my left shoulder rather than at me directly. I'd never want anyone to feel pressured pressured to do something that isn't right for their body. Everyone should just do what's right for them. It was, on its surface, a generous sentiment. It was also underneath a permission slip for me to disappear, dressed up as kindness. The same move she'd made with the "she'll back out on her own" comment through the window, just softened for a room with witnesses. Robert nodded along, oblivious. Diane smiled, relieved that the tension seemed to be dissolving. I sat there and ate my dinner, and I thought about the word obviously doing its quiet work again, this time wearing a different costume. Later that night, loading the dishwasher, Diane cornered me gently in the kitchen while the others watched a movie in the next room. "I hope you know she doesn't mean anything cruel by all this," she said, echoing, almost word for word, what Ethan had told me 2 years earlier at the steakhouse. "She's just under so much pressure right now. Wedding planning brings out the worst in everyone." "I understand pressure," I said, and left it there, because I wasn't ready yet to tell her what pressure had actually looked like for me that summer, and because some part of me still wanted to protect Diane from the version of her daughter I was starting to see clearly. "You're a good sport about all of it," Diane said, patting my arm on her way back to the living room, and I remember standing alone at the sink for a moment afterward, turning that phrase over. A good sport. Like the whole thing was a game with rules I'd agreed to, instead of a pattern I hadn't chosen and couldn't yet name. The fifth move, the one that finally broke through whatever ceiling I thought we'd already hit, came 4 days before the party, when Vanessa called Ethan directly, in tears, and told him she was so stressed and so hurt that I seemed to be making this whole wedding season about myself. She cried about how hard it was to plan a wedding while walking on eggshells around my feelings. She reminded him, according to what he told me afterward, that he'd always taken care of her, and asked him not to let one bad moment define the whole relationship. Ethan listened to all of it. He told me later that he sat at his desk at work, on his lunch break, and let his sister cry into the phone about how hard his generosity had made her life, while a separate browser tab sat open on his screen with a flagged loan file that had his sister's fiancé's name on it, a file he had pulled 2 days earlier after a routine underwriting alert crossed his desk, and something about it hadn't sat right. He didn't tell her about the file. He told her he loved her, that he hoped the party would be fun, and that he'd see her soon. Then he hung up, and he told me later that in that moment, something in him went very quiet and very still, the same way I'd gone quiet and still on the sidewalk outside her apartment. He didn't say anything to me about the file yet either, not for 2 more days. I asked him once in the car after that call why he hadn't told Vanessa the truth right then, hadn't stopped her mid-sentence and said plainly, "I know what you did." He was quiet for a moment before he answered, "Because the second I say something, she'll start covering it. Moving money, getting Marcus to co-sign something after the fact to make it look consensual. I need to know the full shape of it before I say anything, or she'll just build a new story around whatever piece I show her first." I understood even then that this wasn't coldness. It was the same careful, methodical instinct that made him good at his job, applied for the first time to his own family, and it cost him something to hold it that steadily, while his sister cried in his ear about how hard he'd made her life. I want to be honest about my own blind spot here, because it matters. I spent those 2 weeks so focused on the swimsuit, on the size chart, on the invitation, that I didn't notice Ethan pulling further and further into himself, didn't notice the specific quality of his silence in the evenings, the way he'd start to say something and then stop, the way his phone stayed face down on the counter more than usual. I was so consumed with my own dread that I missed the shape of what was happening 2 feet away from me. I found out on a Tuesday night, 4 nights before the party, sitting at our kitchen table with the lights dimmed low because bright light still bothered me some evenings, a small leftover symptom from a June I still wasn't fully past. Ethan came home late from the bank, later than usual, and he didn't say hello the way he normally did. He set his laptop bag down slowly, like it had gotten heavier on the drive home, and he sat down across from me at the table. "I need to show you something," he said, "and I need you to know I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't trying to dig anything up on my sister. It found me." I set down my tea. "Okay, 3 weeks ago, a loan file crossed my desk for review. Standard underwriting flag, nothing unusual on its face. Personal loan, $22,500. Applicant name Marcus Doyle." He paused. I almost didn't clock it. Doyle's a common enough name. But the address on the application was Vanessa's apartment, and the stated employer didn't match anything Marcus has ever told us at Thanksgiving. My stomach dropped, slow and heavy, like something sinking through water. "I couldn't just look the other way," he said. "It's my job to flag inconsistencies." So I pulled it properly, through the right channel, logged it the way I'm supposed to, and what I found is that the loan was approved 6 weeks ago. $22,500 in Marcus's name, with a signature on the application that isn't his. How do you know it isn't his? Because I've seen Marcus's signature. He signed the venue rental agreement I paid for. It's not close. Not even a good forgery, honestly. Just close enough that nobody at the branch double-checked it against ID, because the account information matched the applicant's stated details, and those details were fabricated well enough to pass an automated review. I sat very still. Where did the money go? Ethan pulled a folder out of his bag, the kind of manila folder he used for actual work documents, not for family business, and I understood in that moment that some part of him had been treating this like a case file for weeks, because treating it like a case file was the only way he knew how to hold something this heavy without dropping it. $14,000 went to Sunstone Events, the venue. 3 days days after Vanessa told me the venue had gone up unexpectedly and asked if I could cover an additional $4,000 on top of what I'd already paid. I said no, for the first time in 14 months, because I didn't have it liquid that month. 2 days later, this loan clears, and the venue balance gets paid in full. He tapped the folder. The other $8,500 went to pay off a credit card in Vanessa's name. Store cards, mostly, some jewelry, a resort trip from last spring I don't think Marcus even knows about. I thought about the word obviously, and the word insurance, and the size chart that stopped at a 12, and all of it rearranged itself in my mind into something much larger and much colder than a mean joke about a swimsuit. Does Marcus know? I asked. No, Ethan said, and that's the part I can't sit on. If this loan defaults, if the bank ever escalates a fraud investigation on an unsigned instrument, his name is the one attached to it, his credit, his liability. He could be looking at a debt he never agreed to and never signed for, days before he marries the person who created it. How did you even catch this? I asked. You said it passed automated review. It did, technically. Underwriting software checks income ratios, credit pulls, basic identity verification against the SSN on file. It doesn't compare handwriting unless something else trips a flag first. He rubbed his eyes. What tripped it was the address history. Marcus has lived at his apartment on Sawmill Road for 4 years. The application listed Vanessa's address instead, filed under a note that he'd recently relocated. That's the kind of small inconsistency that gets a file pulled for manual review instead of straight approval. I wasn't even the analyst assigned to it originally. It landed on my desk because I was covering for someone out on leave that week. So it was luck. Bad luck for her. Good luck for Marcus, honestly, though he doesn't know it yet. He opened the folder again and turned it toward me, sliding a printed copy of the venue rental agreement next to a printed copy of the loan signature page. Look at the M. Look at how his real signature loops back on itself at the end, like the pen doesn't fully lift. This one doesn't do that. It stops short every time. Whoever signed this practiced the shape of his name, not the motion of his hand. I stared at the two signatures for a long time, close enough on the surface to fool a computer, wrong enough underneath to break something that mattered. He closed the folder slowly, and I watched my husband's hands, steady his whole life, tremble slightly at the edges. I didn't go looking for this to use against her, he said. I found it doing my job, but I can't unknow it. And I don't think I can watch him sign a marriage license without knowing what he's actually walking into. I didn't know yet what he planned to do with it. I only knew, sitting across from him in our dim kitchen, that the party was in 4 days, that the water park was already paid for, and that whatever happened there was going to be about far more than a swimsuit. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show linked in the description for early access to new stories in better audio quality. Now back to the video. The morning of the party, I stood in the bathroom at 6:40, staring at the navy swimsuit hanging on the back of the door like it was a loaded gun I hadn't decided whether to pick up. Ethan knocked once and let himself in, already dressed, holding a garment bag I hadn't seen before. It's your size, he said. The size you actually are, not the size on Vanessa's registry. I unzipped it. Inside was another swimsuit, a two-piece in deep green, cut for real coverage and real support, clearly chosen with hair by someone who had actually looked at my body instead of guessing at it from across a room. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not sadness exactly, something closer to being seen. I want to confront her today, Ethan said. Only if you want to be there for it. I can do it without you if you'd rather not be in the room. I looked at myself in the mirror. 6 weeks of grief, and now this, had carved something into my face that no amount of concealer could fully cover. I thought about the sidewalk and the window and Vanessa's laugh, easy and comfortable and cruel. I want to be there, I said. I want her to see my face when it happens. We drove to Splash Harbor Water Park, 40 minutes north near Sandusky, arriving a little after 10 in the morning. The parking lot smelled like sunscreen and chlorine, and the specific hot asphalt smell of an August that hadn't decided yet whether it was ending. Vanessa had rented a private cabana near the entrance, pink streamers stapled along the frame, a foil bride-to-be balloon bumping against its string in the wind. 6 or 7 women were already gathered there. Renee, Sophie, a couple of co-workers from Vanessa's office, an old college roommate named Kriya I'd met exactly twice. Vanessa saw me from 20 feet away. Her smile went stiff at the edges. Her eyes, for just a second, went flat and calculating before she rebuilt the smile back into place. You came, she said, too bright, the words landing with the specific falseness of someone whose whole plan had just failed at the first hurdle. We came, Ethan said, pleasant, almost gentle. Before we start, everyone needs to hear something. Renee rolled her eyes, already annoyed, already loyal to Vanessa in the automatic way people get loyal to whoever's throwing the party. Is this really necessary right now? We're literally about to go down the lazy river. Yes, Ethan said. It is. He pulled out his phone. He held it up, angled so the small group could see the screen, and he hit play. Vanessa's voice came out of that speaker, clear and unhurried, completely at home in its own cruelty, exactly the way it had sounded through her kitchen window 2 weeks earlier. She's way too big for a swimsuit. She'll back out on her own. Problem solved. Renee's laugh played right after it, tinny and small through the phone speaker, somehow worse for being replayed than it had been the first time. Nobody moved. A kid shrieked somewhere behind us on a water slide. The foil balloon bumped its string. Vanessa's face went from stiff to a deep, ugly red, the kind of red that spreads from the collarbone up. That was private, she said. It was about my wife, Ethan said, and his voice didn't rise at all. Didn't need to. to. She lost our baby 6 weeks ago, and you decided the funniest thing you could do with that information was plan a party designed to humiliate her out of showing up. The words landed like a physical thing. I watched them land, watched Sophie's hand come up over her mouth, watched Priya's eyes go wide, and then slide sideways toward Vanessa, reassessing something in real time. I didn't know that.